This is Ocarina of Time's intro, and there's only one word for it. Perfect, because watching this still makes you feel like you're in for an epic adventure almost 30 years later. Now that's what I call doing your job as a part of a story. And now that I write stories for a living too, I was curious about something. What happens when you press start? How well did the dungeons in Ocarina of Time do in telling their stories that make you feel something? So on my last playthrough, I ranked each one based on 3 things. If you know them, you won't just be able to judge a story, you'll be able to tell a good one yourself. 1. The concept. Was the dungeon based on a good idea from the start, or did it have to fight uphill to make itself work? 2. The setup. How good was the build toward the climax, which in this case is the dungeon boss? And 3. The payoff. What did you feel during and after the climax? If you know those 3 things, you'll know how good the story was, and spoilers, Ocarina of Time is really good. So the competition between the dungeons was fierce. Having to rank my first place above my second place was an agonizing decision. But we're gonna start in a place you wouldn't expect. Number 9, Dodongo's Cavern. Being in the top 1% of YouTube scriptwriters has taught me some things about storytelling, and one of them is to not insult your audience's intelligence. Ocarina of Time never does that, but it does get uncomfortably close in order to make the Dodongo's Cavern story work, which puts the concept on a shaky foundation. Because you wouldn't think that a race of rock-eating golems that can become steamrollers when they want to would be so weak. But that's exactly what Ocarina of Time is telling us. The Gorons had the spiritual stone of fire. Ganondorf wants it, so Ganondorf decided to block the Gorons' food source in Dodongo's Cavern with a giant boulder. Sounds like a good plan, except it's a boulder that Link, who is a little boy, can easily destroy with a bomb flower. So I never got that one. If Link can do that, Darunia or any of the other Gorons can, unless they're really, really weak, which they're not supposed to be. But Ocarina of Time does save itself from absurdity, or clickbait, by having the cavern be full of exploding, sword-wielding dinosaurs with the fire-breathing King Dodongo as their boss, so I let it slide. At least Ganondorf was thorough. But even then, it still kind of doesn't make sense, for a reason we're gonna get into later in a nearby dungeon. So basically, this concept is a rare moment of relative weakness in Ocarina of Time's narrative technique, but hey, at least the setup to Dodongo's Cavern is better. If the Gorons were as strong as they look, they would fail at doing what they're really supposed to do, which is to provide comic relief in this otherwise dark story. Most of the Zoras are stern, and the Kokiri are kids, so you expect them to be a little mischievous. But the Gorons, watching Darunia breakdance is one of those moments you never forget because it's so absurd in the right way. Unfortunately, the setup starts to weaken again when you step inside Dodongo's Cavern itself. The music doesn't grab you by the throat and take you into this story like the stuff we're gonna see later, and the layout's not so great either. The lava's okay, the exploding Dodongos more so, and the puzzles are actually the toughest of all the child dungeons, but yet Dodongo's Cavern still doesn't feel as treacherous as the dungeon that came before it. And the payoff isn't a high enough point to make up for the weaknesses, because King Dodongo is definitely the least impressive boss in the game, at least as far as fighting goes. He looks the part, he's huge, he breathes fire, and yet he's no fighter, because he's easy as hell to time. even my first time playing this game, I had more trouble beating the Lizalfos, so the boss is an anticlimax. But at least you get that funny scene with Link getting a pat on the head from Darunia for a job well done, plus him doing everything he can to avoid getting crushed in the farewell Goron hug. That's a bit of a reward and it's going to be important later, but it still feels underwhelming for now. Dodongo's Cavern wasn't bad, it set up a lot of important things for later on as we're going to get into, but it was surprisingly inconsistent with the rest of Ocarina of Time's standards, so that's why it's here at number 9. And if you like what you see so far, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really helps and these videos are not easy to make. Number 8, Water Temple. Yeah, you guessed it was going to be pretty low, and it is, but I have to say the Water Temple's not as bad as you think. Story-wise, it was an excellent idea. Zora's Domain, frozen over, one of the most shocking cutscenes in the game. Only King Zora remained, plus the shop, and that whale from before in Zora's Fountain is gone. So, what was the point of all that stuff that's actually before, but we're going to talk about later in this video? Immediately you feel like that whole thing with Princess Ruto was for absolutely nothing. One thing this concept missed though was that having Zora's Domain frozen over could have been a way to raise the stakes by threatening Hyrule's entire water supply, but that wasn't put in for some reason. Maybe graphics constraints, I don't know. So it's a good concept, just not a perfect one. Anyway, the setup was still strong as well. To get to the Water Temple, you first had to go into the Ice Cavern, and this is a cool little mini dungeon, good music, good atmosphere, small so it wasn't too much of a diversion, and yet it was still a challenge that signaled the game was getting harder. And that dialogue from Sheik as you learn the Serenade of Water, one of the most moving in the game. And good news, the strong setup actually continues into the dreaded Water Temple itself. Just listen to that music. The track is one of the most underrated in Ocarina of Time. It's not iconic like some of the others we'll talk about, but I liked it. It's calm, but it gets treacherous. It gradually sucks you into a whirlpool like Charybdis from the Odyssey, or like the whirlpools in some of its rooms. And Princess Ruto's early appearance also added a sense of urgency because she swam up and disappeared. There's no comic relief here like before. It's much more serious, so it's consistent with the theme. But we now get to the buts, where the story arc starts to weaken. This temple has a lot of interesting rooms, a lot of variety. I don't get mad about the challenge, although it will drive you mad if you're going through it for the first time without a guide. The thing that takes the most away from it is that it gets repetitive. Because as cool as some of the rooms are, especially the one with Dark Link, you keep coming back to that same chamber and raising the water level over and over. So by the end of the temple, it feels like that daily bus ride you don't want to take and not an adventure. And constantly pausing to change boots, yeah, you know how that went. Plus, there's this ramp at the end, and after all that, this isn't an additional challenge, it just feels obnoxious. Take my advice and do what I finally learned to do on my last playthrough. Get the ice arrows early. Bus ride finally over, and it would all be okay if the payoff was worth it, but Morpha is by far the least interesting or fun boss in any of the dungeons. The other ones all have charm of some kind, but Morpha is just a circle with a water tentacle or two that you can easily beat in one round. It's a better fighter than King Dodongo because it's harder to time, But Morpha's still not that challenging. Just drag it to a corner and get to work. You'll beat it in one round, no problem. And it has zero personality, so it just feels like another anticlimax after going through that slog. But the ending goes back to being surprisingly good. Ruto gets a lot of development in a short time as she realizes her duties and that Link isn't exactly her destined man. And the cutscene with Sheik as Lake Hylia fills up was also very moving, so the payoff gets better after the fight. There's a lot of good stuff here, but the flaws are enough to take the Water Temple story down a lot despite all its positives, because the competition is just too fierce in this game. Number 7, Inside the Deku Tree. Concept. It's phenomenal, because Link is going to get dragged out of childhood fast. The nightmare sets the stakes for the entire game right away, and then we get to the setup that starts just as wonderfully because it's a roller coaster. The mood from the nightmare changes instantly with a good morning wave from Saria, Link's best friend, the one Kokiri that didn't make fun of him for not having a fairy. And after a pleasant conversation, you're now running around in the forest like a carefree kid, skipping on stones to get some spare change. It's like the nightmare never happened, so it all fits Ocarina of Time's theme perfectly. This is the beginning, the innocent world of childhood, until it becomes not so pleasant anymore. It's not all fun and games, it turns out. It's serious, because the Deku Tree, who is the guardian of Link's entire world, or at least the world he knows, is cursed. And so Link has no choice but to go in and try to save it. Confronting dangers and challenges that were unimaginable just a few minutes earlier is now his reality. And the Deku Tree's theme fits this. It's not one of the iconic themes from this game, but it does the job really well because it's spooky, it's mysterious, it's totally different from the playful forest you were just in outside. It immerses you into this weird kind of transition where you're entering a different world. Now, of course, the dungeon isn't that complicated or remarkable. It's not supposed to be. As we said, it's the transition between having no cares and actually having responsibility. Plus, it's of course the first one in the game, so it wisely didn't try to do too much. But then the vibe shifts immediately, again, at the payoff. You now come across Gohma and just look at it. Look at it staring down at you from the ceiling like it's a wannabe Sauron. In this case, the battle's not nearly that tough. This isn't Sauron we're talking about, but it couldn't be that tough again because it's so early in the game. You don't want to do too much and annoy the player as the players are getting used to the game, but still, it's a lot of fun. And believably, it gets Link to ask what the hell he's just gotten himself into when he was in bed an hour ago. This is worse than any nightmare. And then, to make that complete, the Deku Tree dies anyway, even though Link wins, and Link gets blamed for it. So it's only the first of many bitter moments from a game that's much darker in tone than you would think when you played it for the first time. Now, compared to everything else in Ocarina of Time, the Deku Tree is almost literally child's play, but the forest and the Deku Tree being so small is actually the point because, again, it's the transformation of Link's world. It has to transform rapidly to get the player a good sense of the story and the theme, so it does what a good start to a story should do: drop the main character into a conflict right away. Plus, it sets up two very important things for later, and that nightmare was just the most obvious of the two. So why is the Deku Tree so low even though it did its job almost perfectly? Stiff competition, that's the answer. For starters, I had to compare it with probably the most sheerly funny story arc in this entire game. Number 6, Inside Jabu Jabu's Belly. Underrated. And the concept makes a lot more sense than what we saw back in Dodongo's Cavern, even though it starts sort of lame. Lord Jabu Jabu is the Zora's guardian deity. Unfortunately, we don't know more than that, which is too bad because we're told and shown the Deku Tree guards life in the forest and keeps it peaceful. Not so much with Jabu Jabu, we're not told that, and this is a rare flaw in Ocarina of Time's storytelling. Can you figure out why that is before I get back to it? I will in a couple of minutes, I promise. Anyway, Jabu Jabu is important enough though that the Zora royal family has to take care of him, so Princess Ruto is sort of his butler who brings him food every day, and that's where the trouble comes. Ganondorf pulled a Deku Tree and cursed Jabu Jabu, and he's been weird ever since. And Princess Ruto's gone missing, so guess what? Now you have to find her. The setup from here is straightforward and pleasurable, except for one thing. Zora's domain has great music and scenery, much more so than Goron City, more than Kokiri Forest, more than the Deku Tree. There's a reason it's still remixed after all these years. And from there, with that great atmosphere, you play the fun mini diving game, get the silver scale, go to Lake Hylia, and then you see it. That letter in the bottle, the letter where Ruto begs for help. That's all King Zora needs to waddle over to his right, forcing you to watch the entire time. I think he did 25 or 26 waddles, whatever it was. Not one of the highlights of this game. I never thought it was funny enough to make up for how much time it takes. Now, after hearing all this, you might be thinking that the Jabu Jabu's Belly story arc is weaker than the Deku Trees so far, and I would agree. But don't worry, Link gets swallowed whole just seconds later, and that ought to wake you back up. Things turn around from here fast. You move through this whale thing. Admittedly, it doesn't have the best layout, but I did like fighting those tentacles. Princess Ruto is the real highlight though. You promptly hear that she never wrote that letter that you found in the bottle, and this is interesting, but first things first. You need to keep moving with Ruto, and it's actually a lot of fun. Maybe not on your first playthrough, you probably thought she was annoying like I did, maybe you still do, but just hear me out. Ruto absolutely has one of the more colorful personalities of all the supporting characters in Ocarina of Time, and case in point, what's one thing this game still has over its rivals for GOAT status even after 30 years of graphics improvements? Amazing facial expressions, and those tell so much of the story here. Ruto's are among the best in the game. Plus, her dialogue is a lot of fun, and it's even more fun to throw her at enemies. Doesn't work on the tentacles, but it works most of the time. And then she's gone, replaced by this thing. The Big Octo. Fun and tough mini-boss, a preview for the payoff which comes now. The main boss, Barinade, even more fun. I've always found him to be one of the most challenging bosses in the game. He is a great fighter because he can hit you from long range, then he can hit you from mid-range with those annoying jellyfish he shields himself with, so he has great defense as well. And then he can just run right into you like he was trying to be Goldberg. Hard to time, hard to hit, a great climax for a fun story arc. And that conclusion, for me, even when I thought Ruto was annoying, it was always really, really funny. So I think I've made enough of a case to rank this above the Deku Tree's story arc on the whole. So what stops it from climbing up the ranks? Remember that flaw we talked about earlier? It was in the setup to this story, or rather it wasn't. Jabu Jabu's belly doesn't have the same sense of urgency that the other dungeons we're about to talk about had, and in some cases it doesn't even have the same sense of urgency that the dungeons we already talked about had. Even Dodongo's Cavern had that whole starving Gorons thing, but Jabu Jabu's belly, I never really got the sense of something bad'll happen if I don't do this quest, except maybe to Princess Ruto. So I don't quite get it. It's not like the developers couldn't have set the stakes higher. We did hear that Zora's fountain was the source of all of Hyrule's water, and we saw it. And just like in the water temple, that wasn't as much of a threat as it should have been. So again, another missed opportunity. But the positives of this story arc still outweigh the negatives. There are higher highs here than in the other dungeons we've talked about so far, and that's why it's here at number 6. Also, I really love how that message in the bottle was probably a deception from Ganondorf, which was a foreshadowing of just what was coming. It was like you knew stuff was about to get serious, and it does, because we've come to number 5, the Fire Temple. Nothing major, just a fire-breathing dragon on a mountain that threatens the whole world and a genocide waiting to happen. You know, that sort of thing. And you knew it was gonna be that serious as soon as Link left the Temple of Time and saw that huge ring of fire over Death Mountain. It's literally the first thing you see outside after the time skip. It's that first thing that makes you go,
I am in a world of shit.
And the anticipation gets built even more because it's not your first stop on the adult tour. You know where that is, but we'll get to that later. When it's time though, the Fire Temple has all the urgency that Dodongo's Cavern doesn't. It looks bad the moment you begin this story arc. The sky over Kakariko Village doesn't just look cloudy, it looks like the village is about to become Pompeii and get buried in volcanic ash. Then when you go back to Goron City, you find something, or rather you don't find something. No Gorons, that is. There's only one left in the open, and wouldn't you know it, Darunia had a son that he named after Link. And that's when we learn everything. The Gorons are about to be fed to a fire-breathing dragon that Ganondorf revived just because he can, just so no one gets any funny ideas. And just in case that wasn't enough, when you finally come across Darunia and stare at him across the fire, he tells you that the dragon will get loose and burn Hyrule to ashes. So this story not only has urgency, it does a great job at increasing the heel heat on Ganondorf, almost literally. You want to get your hands on him even more now, which is great to build up your final villain. Take notes, you want to make things in your story matter, this is how you do it. And just to increase the sense of urgency that much more, Darunia goes to fight the dragon without the weapon he said he needs. Which brings us back to Dodongo's Cavern for a moment, because if he could fight Volvagia, the dragon, alone, he could have definitely cleared that thing out. So that's another reason why it doesn't make any sense. But there's something else I really love about the Fire Temple, and I think it does it better than anywhere else in the game. There's the message that there's always hope no matter how dark it is. The happiness on the Gorons' faces and Link's as he frees them is the proof of that. No other dungeon has that same visual and visceral marker of your progress. And you do it all in the knowledge that something's waiting at the end. The thing on the other side of that room where Link saw Darunia again after 7 years. The reason for that ring of fire. Now it's time to literally cross over into the payoff. Meet Volvagia, by far the most menacing boss we've seen in the video up to now. He's not as hard to beat as Barinade for me, but I recommend you get the ice arrows early because they're really, really good against him, and yes, you can do it. Now back to the show. Volvagia is a great story boss, even though he's easier to beat than Barinade. Looks and acts the part, still tough, forces you to stay on your toes. Finally, after a lot of cycles it feels like, he goes down, Death Mountain erupts, that awful ring of fire is gone, and the sky over Kakariko Village is blue again. Not for long, but at least for now. And your reward? Darunia doesn't pat Link on the head like he's some kid anymore. He says they're true brothers now, so that sort of makes you feel like you're a Spartan or a medieval knight who's earned his recognition as a man. It's not the most emotionally moving scene in this game, but it is a proud one and it does feel fitting. And now the biggest Stone Cold Steve Austin what of anything we've seen so far.
What?
Number 4. The Shadow Temple. Concept. How in the world did Ocarina of Time get an E rating when this was in it? That's the concept of this story arc in a nutshell. What you think is the case often isn't, and what you didn't see is often more horrifying than you've ever dreamed. That's why it has to stay buried even if it's in plain sight, for your peace of mind. And that is the Shadow Temple. Setup. The stakes get set right away when something so familiar suddenly becomes a disaster zone. Kakariko Village escaped the wrath of Volvagia. It even escaped Ganondorf because people from Hyrule Castletown fled there. But it didn't escape the demon that escaped its seal in the well. Good idea, good concept, but unfortunately this is where I have to talk about another flaw, albeit a minor one. The seal wasn't really explained that well. We got no foreshadowing, or at least not the kind of foreshadowing you'd think we should get. And you'd think the monster would have escaped by now anyway, long ago, with Ganondorf running around for 7 years. So doing it this late in the game was kind of a mistake in the narrative. Knowing about it earlier, for example, would have put the player in a dilemma of whether to save Kakariko Village from the dragon on Death Mountain first, or save it from this demon guy first. So why does the Shadow Temple excel anyway? One reason. Link has to go back in time first, to the bottom of the well where the demon was sealed, and he has to do that as a kid. It's not that big of a place, but it's the first time you hear that music, and it's also the first time you face one of the most mind-blowing creatures this game has to offer, the Dead Hand. It starts as a bunch of ghostly white hands that grab Link, and then the actual thing comes trying to take a bite out of him, and you have to fight it off using kid weapons. You do get a good reward with the Lens of Truth, but reward is only relative in this case because the real truth has now been revealed. Hyrule isn't what you thought it was. It was a much darker place than you knew even before Ganondorf came. And the well was just the starter act. It's time to go forward in time again and enter the Shadow Temple, which is like nothing you've ever seen before. It's surprisingly simple in its layout. With a few exceptions, it's a straight shot from the entrance to the boss chamber. But oh, what a ride that is. Literally. The walls talk and tell Link about the history of this place. It's Hyrule's dirty little secret. The Shadow Temple is the polite words for it. What you're actually on is an all-access tour to the royal family's secret torture chamber. Not Ganondorf. The royal family that you thought was good up to now did all of this. So the Shadow Temple is basically another coming-of-age moment. The world looks like a choice of white or black, good or evil when you're a kid, or if you spend too much time on social media, they're kind of the same thing. But when you're an adult, and when you're in the real world, it's not always so black and white. These kinds of painful truths are part of growing up. Now Link knows. Ganondorf, clearly the bad guy by now, but the side he's been fighting on isn't exactly all good. Case in point, there are all sorts of torture devices in this place now trying to get to him. Blood pooling on the floors of some of the rooms, and just to add to the anxiety you're feeling by now, there are invisible platforms and traps. You even have to fight Stalfos on one of them. Then there are those giant hands coming down to grab you from the ceiling. They're back. What? Back? Yeah, because it's not the first time you're seeing them, but first things first. Because the dead hand's back too. You run into him almost as soon as the temple starts, which is a pretty good way to foreshadow how bad this thing is gonna be. And there's something different about this place compared to every other dungeon we've explored so far. Every room, every enemy is there to create one feeling in you, the player: dread. Especially when you get on that boat and it starts tolling those bells and you're fighting the Stalfos in that narrow, confined space. Surreal. You could actually argue that the Shadow Temple isn't the scariest dungeon in this game. There is another one, but that one that we will see shortly wasn't a literal torture chamber. There weren't reminders everywhere of just how bad the world can be. So the Shadow Temple has an amazing setup. With only one possible exception, no other temple keeps you quite as nervous as this one, and the payoff doesn't disappoint. Finally, you meet that demon that broke out of the well, and the Shadow Temple's boss manages to take things to another level still. If you had to pick the scariest boss in Ocarina of Time without knowing anything else about the game, I'll bet most people would pick Bongo Bongo. I mean, just look at him. Or don't. You can't see him without the lens of truth, just his giant hands coming right at you. And this fight takes the feeling of dread to a whole new level. And it's not just because you're watching your magic meter tick down as you fight him, though that is a nice touch. The thing that takes the dread to a new level is something that's actually rooted in real combat. As somebody that's done martial arts and competitive sparring for years now, I can tell you that the scariest shit is the stuff you can't see coming. So imagine what it would be like fighting somebody like Bongo Bongo. It doesn't help that he messes with your movement too by beating his drum when he's not trying to beat the shit out of you. Again guys, get the ice arrows early. Bongo Bongo isn't the hardest boss in this game, but now, having that experience, I appreciate just how intimidating he'd be in a real fight. So that's a great climax. Unfortunately, the conclusion to the Shadow Temple is just a little lacking. Link reunites with Impa, but he never developed the sort of relationship with her that he did with the other sages, so it feels like a letdown of a reward for that almost literal descent into Hades. Other dungeons excel more in individual areas than the Shadow Temple. Better layout, perhaps better music, what have you. But so far, the Shadow Temple is the best one, the best story arc we've seen at putting all the elements together. And this one, more than any up to now, makes you feel a lot. In almost anything else, this story arc would be the best. But this is Ocarina of Time, so there's still a top 3. Number 3, Spirit Temple. Concept. This part of the story can't match the terror of the Shadow Temple, so the concept changes. Instead of dread, the overall feeling it gives you is more subtle. There's one place in Ocarina of Time you haven't gone to yet, at least normally. It's an important place though. It's Ganondorf's homeland, the Gerudo Desert. This is basically the exotic travel phase of the game, with mysteries that need to be unlocked before you're ready for your last fight. This is not a concept that's guaranteed to work. A lot of stories get it wrong, but Ocarina timed it very well because everywhere else in the game is familiar by now. There's just only one big question mark that still remains. And the setup is executed very well. Ocarina of Time came out in the same year as Metal Gear Solid, another iconic game, and wouldn't you know, there's a bit of Metal Gear Solid in this story arc. The journey starts like a Metal Gear game. You have to avoid being seen by the Gerudo guards. If you do, there's no loud exclamation mark that comes over their heads. You get sent to jail immediately. But somehow you still have all your gear, which proves that just having good eyes doesn't mean they have good brains. I'll let the absurdity slide because this is actually one of my favorite parts of the game. It really tests you and keeps you on a hair trigger. One wrong move and you know you're going to have to start all over again. And the Gerudo cell guards are good too. They're fun to fight. But they're also very good for the story, for the overall narrative, because now you see why people in the rest of Hyrule are scared of these girls. And that music as you sneak around in Gerudo Valley, it's absolutely iconic, adds so much to the atmosphere. Anyway, it takes 4 of those fights to earn the Gerudo's respect, and here you thought getting into some girl's DMs on Instagram was tough. But after that, the fortress becomes a playground. No, not that way, literally. You get the horse archery minigame, which is probably my favorite in Ocarina of Time, plus the Gerudo training grounds, you get access to that. And it's a fun challenge, and yes, the ice arrows are worth it. You just have to know when to do it. But the Gerudo Fortress was just the opening act. Next up, you have to cross the desert in a raging sandstorm, and at the end of it, there's something that will turn Ocarina of Time's narrative completely on its head. Following the Phantom Guide across the haunted wasteland, not so tough, but here's the thing, it feels tougher than it really is because of the awkward movements from the ghost, and watching your magic meter tick down with the lens of truth, that's always good to add some anxiety as we talked about before. And it all makes this cutscene so much better. The greatest landscape cutscene in the game. Out of the sandstorm, you come to an oasis with a colossal goddess carved into a mesa. There it is, the temple, feeling like a reward after all that sneaking around and that tough journey in the desert. And then, after a little timely relief from the Great Fairy here, in you go to find nothing. All this way for nothing. At least that's what you probably thought the first time you played the game. Once you go outside again, Sheik comes, and you learn the most majestic of all the songs in Ocarina of Time, the Requiem of Spirit. And even that damn owl being there to take flight makes the cutscene that much more awe-inspiring. And now we come to that thing that turns the narrative on its head. Throughout this entire game, Link was exploring the world first as a kid, and then seeing how it changes after he grew up. But this entire desert, Link sees it for the first time as an adult. Then he has to come back and see it as a kid. But here's what's even more impressive than that story twist. The Spirit Temple does it all brilliantly because after what Link's seen by now, there's really no going back. Link might be able to go back in time, but in his body only, not in his mind, not in his memories. So the Spirit Temple is no childhood vacation. It has all the dangerous challenges of adulthood. Still, it's just crueler because they're happening to a kid, plus you have weaker kid weapons. So that's a cruelty that's not quite as in your face as the Shadow Temples was, but that arguably makes the Spirit Temple even worse. Because remember, the things you don't see coming are how you really get knocked on your ass. But first up, you meet Nabooru, and she winds up promising something. It's not all that clear yet, but what did I just say about how there's really no going back? In this case, art really does meet life. Anyway, it's through the twists and traps in the temple you go, and your reward? You get to fight an iron knuckle with child weapons. Better have 50 Deku sticks on call, plus Nehru's love helps. But then you see something horrible. Nabooru sinking into the sand at the hands of those two witches, which means it's time for Act 2. You go back to the temple as an adult, but by now something's become clear. The Spirit Temple isn't the most challenging, and it doesn't have the most intense or memorable moments as far as temple gameplay does, but there's a real argument to be made about its greatness anyway by looking at the sum of its parts. You'll find arguably no dungeon that's more immersive. The music, that track, adds to the overall feeling that you're in an exotic and far-off land uncovering ancient mysteries. It's also the perfect layout for a Zelda dungeon in general. From those cool sunbeam puzzles to the challenging iron knuckles to that incredible central chamber with the goddess statue, nothing in this temple feels repetitive, which is something you honestly can't say about any other dungeon in Ocarina of Time. You may go back to that same central chamber a few times, but it's always to do something else. Even fighting the iron knuckle for the second time is different because it turns out to be none other than a brainwashed Nabooru. Which means at last we've come to the payoff. The one downside to this temple, unfortunately, is Twinrova. It's a fun boss fight for sure, but it just winds up being disappointing because the witches and their Patara earrings fusion form don't do all that much. Their movements and attacks are predictable, so it's really easy to knock them down in one go. But their death scene is hilarious. They have personality, that matters. And then you find out what that promise Nabooru made was. Sort of. It went over my head the first time I played the game, but we have to be PG to be algorithm friendly, so that's all I'm going to say about it. The Spirit Temple story arc was absolutely amazing, and in any normal production it would be the crowning achievement, but this is no normal production, which means I finally have to do it. I have to solve that problem I talked about all the way at the beginning. The final two dungeons on the list are both essentially flawless masterpieces, so putting one above the other is really hard. And honestly guys, it might just be a matter of taste. You can easily flip a coin and say something different and I won't argue. But after long thoughts on those long days of Christmas shopping, I finally arrived at my conclusion. Number 2, Forest Temple. Concept. Just start with the most memorable piece of dialogue in the entire game. The one that would be the answer to the question about what Ocarina of Time is about if it were ever asked on a test in school. The flow of time is always cruel. Its speed seems different for each person, but no one can change it. What doesn't change with time is a memory of younger days. There's nowhere in this game where that line is truer than right now in the Forest Temple. Setup. This is where Link enters the grown-up world. The first thing he learns is that Saria, his best friend, is in danger. That first talk they had in 7 years, it's not some joyful experience, it's not a reunion, she's begging for help. So he has to have a race against a ghost first. Then he goes back home and sees the place he was raised in infested with monsters. The kids he grew up with are under siege. That carefree childhood sanctuary is being violated. But there's something that might be even worse. No one recognizes him. It's the loneliness of adulthood at the very worst time. So the stakes here are very high, and the trouble comes as a smack in the face, more than in any other story arc in the game, honestly. Link is just dumped into a grim conflict after being in deep freeze for 7 years and still having the mind of a kid. And that's why the saddest cutscene in the game is what it is. After going through the Lost Woods and seeing those Deku scrubs get replaced by terrifying moblins, you only come across an empty stump. Saria always used to be there, but not anymore. And that was all just the warm-up act. Remember when I said you could argue that the Shadow Temple wasn't the scariest in this game? That's because the Forest Temple exists, and sure, it's not an in-your-face horror movie, but the horror here is subtler, slower, and always lurking. First of all, there's that theme. If the Shadow Temples is horror dialed up to 11, the Forest Temples is eerie and mystical. It's got that fear of the unknown thing in it. And it's so different from the 3 child dungeons that you might think you were playing a different game if you didn't know any better. It's like telling you, ready or not, you're an adult now, and things are now getting serious. And visually, the temple is filled with this fog that makes even the lighter rooms in it more treacherous. Other rooms are just dark. It's fitting that almost the entire thing is a grand tour to bring light back to the main room, the fire that those 4 creepy ghosts stole. What you get on that tour is a challenging maze, rooms that twist and turn like they were alive, giant hands dropping down from the ceiling to grab you, a literal false ceiling that wants to crush you, and of course, those 4 ghosts staring at you from paintings, laughing, taunting you with puzzles, pulling a TN and using a multi-form technique. Of all the dungeons I played through for the first time, the Forest Temple was honestly the one I had the most trouble with, aside from the Water Temple, of course. But unlike the Water Temple, this trouble was engrossing instead of annoying. The confusion of this maze just makes the Forest Temple's chilling atmosphere even more anxiety-inducing, and we haven't even gotten to the climax yet. Payoff. You'd think that beating the Poe sisters and getting the fire back into the room would be the end of the anxiety, but instead you get an invitation. Not just any invitation though, an invitation to go down like you're descending into the underworld. So Link goes down the elevator and winds up trapped in a cage like he's in the UFC. And his opponent, once again, his nightmare repeats. It's Ganondorf, you know, the one that kicked his ass the first time they met. For that split second, it was really shocking. But then you get a little relief it's not Ganondorf, just a ghost riding a horse through a painting right at you. Then you play a bit of Key Blast tennis with him, and you know what? I always found the copy more challenging to fight than the original. I didn't really know why, but now that I have martial arts experience, I do. It's because you can't control the distance as well. The OG is further away from you when he throws his energy blasts, plus you can use the big Goron sword against them, which has a longer reach. A wall of long jabs is a very good defense to have. But here in the Forest Temple, your reach is shorter, and Phantom Ganon can be right on top of you. Plus, he can just hit you from weird angles. So he's harder to time, it's easier for you to get hit, and you can be fighting him in a place that fighters call the pocket. Toe-to-toe, a true test of nerve. A great, challenging fight. And once you finish the ghost off, you get a warning from Ganondorf himself that your fight with him won't be so easy. I laugh at that now, but as far as narrative escalation goes, that's exactly what you want to do. And then comes the reward. The reunion with Saria. It's the saddest reward of all, really. No more carefree days in the forest. The two of you can't live in the same world. It's destiny. And it's true. Few of us keep our childhood friends, or even the friends we made a few years ago. Time and circumstances make people drift apart, and this is the proof. Even in a magic land like Hyrule, no one is immune from friendship drift. The flow of time is always cruel. It's a bitter payoff, but a very moving one. So why in the world did I put something this brilliant in second place? It's only because the competition was just that steep. Number 1, Ganon's Castle. Concept. As we've seen, time was very cruel to Link. But at least in this game, you could argue that Zelda got it even worse. At least Link got put in cryo like Master Chief for 7 years. Zelda actually had to hide out, living like a refugee in her own country, witnessing every evil that came upon it, and she couldn't do a damn thing about it. Plus, she knew that it was all her fault, so I seriously wish we got a game or at least a comic of her troubles during those years. But now, her destiny and Link's finally intertwine again in the place where the trouble began. Setup. Link goes back to the Temple of Time and sees something amazing. Zelda's big reveal that she was Sheik all along shocked me the first time I played this game, and even today the scene is still very moving. Link was looking for her for so long, across so many trials, and here she is in front of him, finally. And her facial expressions are the best and most believable in the game. It might be Nintendo 64 graphics, but you still feel all the weight of her responsibility and regret as she's there looking at Link. And then she gets captured and you feel the weight of all her stress. And you learn that Ganondorf let you run around all this time just to smoke her out of her hiding place. It was all a trick. Another shock. So the adventure wasn't necessarily because Link really was that strong. Ganondorf underestimated the Triforce of Courage, but you see he still wasn't too worried about it, especially now with the Triforce of Wisdom potentially falling into his hands. Basically, you might have won all those trials only because he let you. Oh, that was a big shock. No better way to undermine your confidence before the final fight than that, right? And he interrupted your touching reunion, so that makes you mad. If you want Zelda back, come to my castle, he says. It's an obvious trap, but there's no choice. Stakes set, your odds questionable, urgency, well, don't go and Ganondorf gets the Triforce of Wisdom and can do whatever he wants to Zelda. Ganon's castle has a really good layout, and you probably wouldn't think that, but it does. It makes you work to get to the final boss, but it's not a whole new odyssey. The challenges are serious, especially in breaking the shadow barrier with those invisible platforms that are so anxiety-inducing. And yet, these challenges are never intrusive or obnoxious because they don't take attention away from the real story of this dungeon. They're just a nice warm-up act. You even get a reward out of it with the golden gauntlets that Link can use to get one final gift from the Great Fairy. Damage cut in half. The fact that it took this long to get such a gift helps to remind you that you're about to take some hits in a league above everything else you saw up to now. And then there's that scene. The one with the organ. Zelda's terror, Ganondorf's laugh. It's finally come. Link had nightmares about it, he got his ass kicked, now he needs to fight Ganondorf for real. Great build-up. Fortunately though, even though he goes down more easily than he should, we're not done. Because when he goes down, he does what a sore loser does. Try to crush Link and Zelda as his castle collapses. And I love this part of the game. It's not hard, but it's still thrilling. Plus, it adds that re-dead at the entrance to freeze you just to make it a little more heart-pounding. And Zelda's gasps every time you get hit was a nice touch as well. Then Link and Zelda get out, and just when they're about to have their reunion at last, they're interrupted. Again. There's that sound. And Zelda's face when she asks what it is a picture. I love the expressions in this game. At last, we've come to the ultimate payoff. Of course, it's Ganondorf. He comes back and seems to sacrifice his humanity for victory. He blows up into a grotesque version of himself, Ganon, and he knocks the Master Sword out of Link's hands. It's dark in the Nintendo 64 version, only Ganon's eyes are shining, there's fire surrounding the arena. That music? If there were ever an Olympics for final boss music for a story, this theme should get gold. And Zelda is still there to make it all more realistic as well. She doesn't gasp when you get hit anymore, she screams in horror. So it makes you want to avoid doing that again. A nice little way to add urgency and caution to this fight. And it's over in 2 rounds. He's a lot harder in the second though, he tracks you much better. Anyway, finally Ganon goes down, the Master Sword glows, Link strikes the final blow, the sages seal him away, and then it's all beautiful again. The bleak sky is bright and blue, and now the actual emotional reunion with Zelda can finally happen for real. A perfect environment for one, right? No, it's not. It's not all that happy, it's not romantic. You can see that in her face. Link goes back home to regain his lost time, but as we said, there's really no going back. Link warns the royal family in the past, but the ending to Ocarina of Time feels much more bitter than sweet. And even when I played it for the first time, I was wondering, is that really it? Because it didn't feel like the reward that I was expecting. It was just the end, and that was it. So now, think about all those different feelings I talked about for this dungeon. This one dungeon has such incredible emotional range. But the Forest Temple does too, so why does this get first place? It's because of how personal it is. The Forest Temple has that too, just not as intensely, even with Saria in the story arc. But here, Link has to face the sum of all his fears. He has to face Ganondorf's focused hatred as he sacrifices his humanity. He has to see all of Zelda's feelings from hope and happiness to regret and sheer horror, all up close and personal. And they're never as up close and personal anywhere else as they are here. Plus, the reward isn't what you expect, so that's guaranteed to stir very strong emotions. In short, Ganon's castle is everything you could want for a climax and conclusion to a story. Get that wrong and everything else in the tale could collapse. But Ganon's castle managed to get it right, even though the happy ending was still, again, more bitter than sweet. A very hard act to pull off, but Ocarina of Time did it, and that's why Ganon's castle is here in first place. But do you agree with my order? Let me know in the comments.